もしやコスモでは。
Cosmo makes me free.
Cosmo AP Luxury Sports.
Welcome to episode 53 of my 76 Mazda Cosmo restoration. The last episode was spent unsucking the position of the water-to-air intercooler. This episode, let's finish up fabricating the intake tubing. Well, now that this thing has its fluid, time to give it its air. Yes, and I know air is a fluid. Don't comment. That was extremely satisfying. Going to replace the stock intercooler nipples with these awesome clamps from Racetronics that use a clamp that holds a band in place that seals the flanges with O-rings. I think everyone can agree that they're much more awesomer, if not more fiddly to put together. Yeah, it looks like I need to take at least maybe a quarter of an inch off the intercooler still. Took a little bit of grinding and filing to get this thing straight, because believe it or not, there's not a single straight side on this out of the factory, but I think that is about damn near perfect. Took far longer than I care to admit to cut these ends straight. After welding, blowing air through the water passage is the best way I found of cooling this thing down. Almost like it was designed for that. Not bad. Now to do the other side. Oh, that looks great, but of course, now this thing isn't gonna fit. go. Now it's nice and flat. I have a good surface to work from. Probably flatter than it was when I fabricated it those many years ago. When placed in the appropriate positions, these are almost a straight shot. However, I'm going to have to space things out about an inch just to leave room for the blow-off valve. 1 of these tiny marks less than an inch. Yep, 1 little mark less than an inch. $10 3/4, so if I cut for 11, that gives me a little wiggle room. Well, all of that is just lovely. Looks like all I have to do is take a 1/4 inch off of this end. But before I make my final cut, I'm going to weld all of the joints on this side just to lock everything in place. And because this end still has rotation, even though it's fully welded, whereas this end absolutely does not. Just using the O-ring sleeve here to keep this centered on the other side of the clamp, and as long as I press it tightly, it's pretty square. If I carefully pull this away, looks like I need to trim about 3 millimeters. I'm kind of surprised that worked. Intake and exhaust tubing with rigid clamps on both sides always takes so much fit up, but I think this is about close enough because, believe it or not, there is a tiny amount of play in the clamps. And we'll just get some quick tacks on here so that I can stretch the bit before fully welding it. Still fits. And that meets up pretty well still. So a little bit of tape to hold that in place. This tape holds extremely well as long as you give it some pressure. Damn it. Journey. Woohoo! Still fits. I always like to mount my blow-off valves as close to the throttle body as possible. And at a slight up angle, I think that looks good. Going to see if I can mark this using the old calibrated eyeball. But oftentimes what I like to do is stick in a hole saw and use the center hole to kind of make it easier to center my marker. Looks a little big. Oh, nope. That'll work. The last thing I need to weld back onto this is the bung for the intake air temperature sensor. And I'm going to line it up with the flange for the blow-off valve. About right. And it just has to point down a little bit so that in case any moisture gets on the sensor, it will drip off and not into. Well, that is fully welded. Bonus, still fits. Now to the other side. These clamps take up a lot of space, so I think what's going to happen is the compressor housing will get rotated. This 90-degree welded directly to it, and from there it's a fairly straight shot over to the intercooler. Now, believe it or not, this is actually the first time I've ever cut the outlet off of a compressor housing and welded a new one onto it. There's kind of a natural casting line here I can follow which will guide my cut. The trick is keeping it flat. Well, that was terrifying, but it looks straight enough. It must be luck because to me, that looks like it lines up pretty damn well. I mean, absolute skill. Now I'll just give a few tack welds between the clamp and the 90. Yeah, something like that. Just going to trim this down a little bit on the bandsaw so I can get this end into the larger fitting so I can get a better measurement of where it needs to be cut. Actually looks like it needs to be a little lower, so I'll cut maybe an 1/8 inch off of this. There's actually quite a lot of trimming I can do to this, at least another 1/4 inch before it starts cutting into the transition. Yep, that's about centered. Much better. Before I trim this end, I want to get this end on the turbo kind of locked down to its final position. So, all I have to do is line that up until the pipe is centered in the intercooler coupling. And then just mark it into position. Don't know by what miracle it's actually staying there. It's kind of neat. There we go, one little tack. That's the first time I've ever welded a compressor housing. And I just wanted to put the tack in a spot that would let me articulate this a little bit. And with the compressor housing back on the car, that still lines up. So I guess I can fully weld this joint. I've clamped this thing to a big chunk of aluminum to hopefully avoid any warpage. even though I don't think the area I'm welding would be prone to warping. Wow, there's one big heat. Tungsten's way out and the gas flow is up real high. I've let this thing completely cool with this big aluminum plate equalizing the temperature, so I should have no issues with warps. Only thing is, I'm not massively happy about that weld. It was a real pain in the tuchus to access, and it's not great. I may have to revisit that, but for now, let's plow forward. Still fits. And the last piece of this puzzle is a transition to go from the 2.5-inch intercooler side to the 2-inch turbo side. To go from 2-inch to 2.5-inch, I have to make a small sheet metal cone. So honestly, I Googled sheet metal cone pattern template generator and found this one at blocklayer.com, which seems to do what it promises. So I know my top width is 2 inches, my base width is 2.5 inches. I want it to be 1/2 inch in height, and there's my cone. Save that as a PDF. Now saving it as a PDF is probably going to give me the most accurate output compared to the printer, and print that sucker with no scaling. None. Now, if this thing is accurate, it should just be a matter of cutting it out with my ultra dull scissors. Then just trace it onto some thin aluminum, and incidentally, I did test the paper against the intercooler and it seems like it's accurate. Note to self, get a thinner bandsaw blade. Using some 60mm pipe as a mandrel, I think I can just kind of get a curve happening here. Maybe not. Duh, obviously I needed much thinner tubing. I think a slip roller would be the obvious tool for this, which clearly I have. Well, that's not bad. With a little bit of filing, it actually fits perfectly within the lip of the intercooler side clamp. And a few tacks to hold it in place. Okay, this thing is exactly 1.5 inches deep, and this piece of rectangular tubing is 1.5 inches. So this should be about where I need to cut. And that is damn near perfect. All tacked up, and yep, still fits. Which means the final welds are coming up. Thin. And that is the last weld. I guess I could have used a bit thicker metal on that cone piece, because man, that was just a lot of tickling with the torch to get that to weld without creating holes. Although we don't necessarily want to avoid tickling holes. Well, after all that welding, I sure hope she fits. Now, I'm not assembling it with the O-rings because, well, there's kind of just no point. Excellent. And that's it. It's done. The intercooler has been relocated to where it should have been in the first place, and the tubing has been much more awesomized. But man, that was a lot of work. Honestly, it took a lot longer than I thought it would, and was a little bit depressing that I was actually going far more backwards in work in order to go forwards to where I should have been in the first place. But I gotta say, it was totally worth it. And thus, episode 52 draws to a close. By the way, have you ever watched the 1983 David Cronenberg film, The Dead Zone? Were you paying attention at about 1 hour and 23 minutes? Did you see it? You saw it that time, right? I just want to know how. And why? I mean, the movie was filmed in Toronto, but there's no way it's my Cosmo. because it's clearly the wrong color. But how is that possible?